Okay, welcome. We are continuing our journey setting up the Foundry development. So I've got this Theatre of the Mind project, and if you remember from last time, we put it all into GitHub. We've cloned out the repository from GitHub, and we've basically just got these two files now, license and README. If we look at all of the files that are here, we've also got the git ignore, which had all of the ignoring all the files for Node that we don't need. We'll see later on how that plays out. And the .git there is just the repository itself. A few things to note before we get started. First of all, I'm assuming you're going to be using Linux or a Unixy type system. Most of these should work on Mac OS. You should have installed your preferred text editor or IDE. I'm going to be using NeoVim. You should have Docker installed. We're going to be using Docker, so if you haven't got that installed, dip off and install that. And we will also be using, particularly in the early stages, we're using Node.js installed locally, so it's worth installing that. So we are currently sitting inside a Git repository, a Git workspace, technically speaking. So if I do status, I can see that I'm in line with the origin, which means that there's nothing being committed. Okay, so we've got no new files, nothing's been committed, we're not out of date. The first thing you ought to do is set up your email and name if you haven't already done so. I'm going to now do that, and I'm going to set them up globally. So all you need to do is set these two values using the git commands. Okay. All this means is that all your log messages will now be correctly attributed to you. So you can just check that with, helps if you spell git correctly. Okay, so now we can see lots of information. So we've got the at the top there, you've got the email and username we've just set. All the rest of that stuff is bookkeeping information for Git itself. Not something we need to worry about right now. This isn't really a lesson on Git. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up two facilities, one called Husky and one called Committizen. And these do two things. Husky allows us to associate scripts that run as part of the Git process. They're called hook scripts, and Husky just takes care of keeping those in the right places, making sure they get executed. Committizen is a utility for making sure that our commit messages all follow a standard format. This has big advantages later on down the line when we come to want to automate things like producing our release notes, so the changelog can be automatically regenerated from our log messages, and it always looks nice and neat and makes sense. The other thing it allows us to do is automatically bump version numbers. So it knows, for example, that if there's a breaking change, it needs to bump the major version number. If there's fixes that are not breaking changes, or there's changes that are not breaking changes, it can update the minor number. Otherwise, it can just update the patch number, things like that. Okay, so to get started with doing this then, the first thing we're going to want to do is tell it that we are working with a Node project. Okay, so we'll just accept Theatre of the Mind, yes. We'll set version 1. So this is Foundry VTT Theatre of the Mind module. Okay, we'll leave the entry point as this for now. We'll come back and we'll change some of these values anyway. The test command, we'll just leave it as the default right now. I'll show you why. The Git repository. Okay, the Git repository, all it needs is this part of your Git repository. So it needs to know which organization or user it is and which actual name. So we can actually just take that and enter that like that. It does all the rest, putting the prefixes in and the suffixes and so on. You don't have to worry about it. Keywords, I'm not going to bother with keywords. Author, the license. Now we've got the MIT license already in there. There's a bit of a quirk here. The way that this works is you tell it which file your license is in. Okay, is this all correct? Yes. Right, now then, it's not really, because what we're now going to do is we're going to edit this package JSON. You see this test script here. These tests will be, once we've finished wiring all this up, it will actually change this. It'll run these tests. Normally, they would be the tests for our code. But what we're going to do is just change that to warning that there's no test specified. And we're going to get it to return a 0, which is a success. Okay. If we don't do that, then whenever we try to do a commit, it'll say there are no tests specified and it'll stop. Now, if we were being very strict and test-driven design and all that kind of stuff, then we would want that in there. However, it's early days. We don't actually have any code. We don't have any tests, certainly none that would pass. So it's easier just to convert it to a warning and say, just let it be successful. We'll come back and we'll be adding tests later anyway. Okay. So that's Git setup and our initial node installation setup. So now what we're going to do is we're going to install Husky. And the way we're going to do that is just using npx husky init and then npm install. Okay, so it says we want to install, yes. Okay, so now it's actually set everything up now. So it's hooked everything up into Git. So there are now Git hooks running. Now, if we look at our Husky, okay, you'll see that there is a pre-commit script already provided for us. Okay, and if we look at that pre-commit script, you can see what it does is it runs that test, which is the reason why we had to change it. Well, we didn't have to change it. We could have changed it in here. But it's the reason why we did change the test script. Okay, so what happens is before it actually commits the files, it will attempt to run this script. This script in turn will attempt to run any tests we have on our project. Well, we haven't got any. So what would happen is that exit 1 would have returned a failure. This would have failed. Our commit would have failed. The whole thing would have been broken. So that's why we changed the test scripts. The next thing we want to install then is Committizen. So we're going to install all of the packages that are necessary for installing Committizen and setting it up the way we want it to. Okay, so we've now got Committizen installed. What we need to do now is actually configure it. So we do that by creating a cz.rc file. Now, actually, you can add it into your package JSON file. You can see it's added in the dependencies, okay? But we don't want it to actually be in the configuration to be in here. I prefer to keep my package configuration file nice and as slim as I can. So what we do is we create this Committizen RC file, okay, which will be hidden from our view, keeps our directory nice and clean, and it just means that we don't have to have sort of ancillary clutter in our project. Okay, so the nice thing about these dot files, if you didn't know, is that they are by default invisible and you have to kind of force them to become visible. Okay, so we need one of those, and we're going to be adding in the linter. Okay, you'll notice we've added in the commit lint packages here. So we want to add those in as well. So we need a commit lint RC. Now this one is actually going to be in JavaScript, so we just need to make it a JavaScript file. Just add that one line which basically just says to load that in. Okay, so that's the configuration done. Now what we need to do is we need to tell Husky when we want these things to be run. Well, there are two circumstances. The first one is if we do something like git commit without any comment, that has to happen in the what's called the pre-commit message hook. So we need to create one of those. So if we create Husky and it's called prepare commit message. Okay, so we've got prepare commit message hook. Okay. Now, the only line there is really the MPX CZ down the bottom there. The MPX CZ hook basically says when you hit this hook script during the preparation of a commit, we want you to run committizen. It'll prompt you for what you want to put in to your comment. Okay, so we now want another hook in Husky, and this one is the commit message hook. And what this does is it basically says once you've entered a commit message, this will then verify that the commit message meets the requirements. Okay, so all this one does is it runs the commit linter. Okay. Okay, so it's that last line. It just runs the commit lint. Both of these scripts need to be executable. If you actually look at the Husky directory now, you'll notice that only pre-commit is actually in an executable state. On my system, that shows up as being green. You can see that the commit message and prepare commit message we just created are not currently executable. So we just need to change this to, whoops, everything in the Husky directory should be executable. And now we can see that we get the executable on all of the relevant files. So now if we look at our git status, you can see that we've got loads of new stuff. We've got the Husky directory, we've got our two configuration files, we've got the package .json and the package lock file. So what we need to do now is add all of that. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of using git add dot, but in this case it's safe. We know we want to add everything. So now we can see that we've added the pre-commit message, the commit message, we've added all the scripts, we've added all the configuration files, so we are generally good to go. Now we can actually check out, okay, by doing something like this should fail because I know that we know that this commit is not in the approved format. Okay, so what will happen is now, assuming everything's wired up correctly, the commit lint will reject this and force us to enter something sensible. And so there we go. So now we are in the committizen interface. Okay, so we can select what this thing is for. I think we'll call it a chore. Okay, so it's a chore. What's the scope? Well, it's a project-wide. There's no specific thing that this is relevant to, so we'll skip that. Okay, so this is set up the git commit processing. Okay. And I think that's a reasonable reflection of what we're doing. Now we could produce more, but I'm not going to bother. Is it a breaking change? No. Does this change affect any open issue? No. We are one step ahead of the remote repository because we haven't published it back to push it and publish it back. And we've got nothing to commit because we've just added it all. And we are ready to move on to the next step.